We are at the Vatican where just moments from now the process of electing a new pope to lead the Catholic Church and its 1 billion members around the world will begin. Right now, 133 cardinal electors are gathered in the Sistine Chapel, taking an oath of secrecy. When this ceremony is done, the doors of the Sistine Chapel will be closed, kicking off what could be a multi-day voting process to select the next pontiff. Our only signal about their progress will be the appearance of smoke from a chimney atop the Sistine Chapel. Black smoke means no pope elected yet, and voting will continue. White smoke means, as they say, we have a pope. And we'll learn his identity for the first time as he is announced ahead of his appearance on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica behind me. Joining us now for all of it, NBC News correspondent Ann Thompson and our senior Vatican analyst George Weichel. Ann, why don't you start us off? Tell us what we're looking at right now.
We have seen the cardinals process into the Sistine Chapel. They will take the oath of secrecy, and then they will order everyone out, and they'll close and lock the doors of the Sistine Chapel. And then the papal preacher, Cardinal Cantalamessa, will give a meditation. It's expected to be 5 to 10 minutes long. Then he will lead, and the voting will begin. Now, there aren't speeches that are given in the Sistine Chapel. It's not a smoke-filled room. Don't think of it as Congress. But it is a very prayerful, spiritual moment. And they handwrite the ballots on paper. Each cardinal folds his ballot in half, takes it up to the front of the Sistine Chapel, swears an oath, and then puts it in an urn. And then the counting begins. And
the focus on security and secrecy here, it's not just part of the ancient rituals, it's also an acknowledgement of electronic eavesdropping potential in these sorts of things.
The conclave process began over 900 years ago, precisely to keep barons, dukes, kings, whatever, from interfering with a crucial internal decision for the life of the church. In those days, in medieval Europe, everybody was trying to get their hand into the pie of running the church. So it was decided, no, we're going to do this locked up in this conclave with a key. And I think in the main, it served the church very well for 900 years. Now you have got, as you said, Lester, other kinds of security problems. 20 years ago, a false floor was built in the Sistine Chapel, and all sorts of electronic jamming equipment was put underneath that to prevent snooping. Today, the Sistine Chapel is surrounded by electronic jamming equipment. The windows have been sealed. No one is allowed to bring anything in, computer, cell phone, whatever. And that is, again, to assure that the process respects its own integrity, if you will.
And some of the secrecy also prevents us from understanding how the general process works. And you talked about there's no speeches and that sort of thing, but how are people moved off of a position? You know, if you're locked onto a certain candidate, if I can use the term, what moves you off if there's no room for discussion or debate? Or
the discussions happen over meals. That's why it's very important that they all eat together. And even though they're in two different hotels, sequestered in two different hotels, the cardinal electors, because there are so many of them, those meals are a crucial time. That's where candidates and issues are discussed. And then they go back into the Sistine Chapel and resume voting. So it's when they're not in the chapel, that's where the politicking happens.
George, I think there will be some people who will be tuning in and out of this coverage over the next few days as we await the election of a new pope. Can we talk about the timing, what potentially it could look like based on history and what we know they have to accomplish in here?
What we know with almost virtual certainty, Lester, is that it will be black smoke tonight. I mean, the idea of a pope being elected on one ballot is really fantasy land, in part because there will be complementary votes cast tonight. You know, someone who has suffered greatly for the church and you want to honor them with a vote. The really serious measurement of strength of candidacy will come tomorrow morning. And then I think the dynamic that seems to be permanent in these things is if your vote total continues to grow, you can continue to remain alive as a candidate. If it plummets, if you hit a ceiling, then it's kind of hard to come back. In this case, with this very diverse electorate that does not know each other as well as previous electorates did, I think the opportunity for what you might call a consensus compromise candidate, rather than a front runner who gradually builds the vote up over a couple of days, is higher than it has been before. So it's a wide open process right now. There are a lot of moving parts in this. Those conversations that Anne mentioned at meals, but also just, walking around the area near the Vatican guest house in the evening. This is all part of, if I could use a 10-cent word from theology, a discernment process. We're trying to discern what God is asking of the church.
Okay, what's happening here now?
Veritatis et pacis. Ut que tibi placit assunt, toto corde cognoscant, et agnita
Obviously
tota
everything in Latin.
virtutes extentus.
This is Cardinal
Per
Pietro
Christum Dominum
Parolin.
nostrum.
He was the Secretary of State under Pope Francis. He is the senior member by rank of the College of Cardinals. So he is actually going to run this process inside the Sistine Chapel, and he has been widely mentioned as a candidate himself. That was an opening prayer, and now the swearing of the oath of confidentiality will begin.
And as we watch that, we're joined by author Robert Harris, who wrote the novel Conclave, which became an Oscar-winning movie. Mr. Harris, thank you for joining me. I have to think you're seeing this through different eyes than many of us, given your experience on the book and ultimately the film. What are your thoughts as you watch this?
Well, there's a slight sense of deja vu. I tried hard to imagine what it was like when the door closed on the Sistine Chapel and the voting began. And it's rather awesome to see all the cardinals going in and this ancient ritual and this incredible setting. It is, I'm afraid, for a secular man like myself, the ultimate election is how I can't help but see it as that, steeped in history, for an enormously responsible job, 1.4 billion Catholics, and there is politics in it, and that's what attracted me to writing the novel.
In fact, you capture the sense that ultimately, at the end of the day, these are men and they have their jealousies and they have their pet peeves. Was that what you had tried and hoped to capture?
Well, one of the cardinals observes, we serve an ideal, we can't always be ideal, and that sort of summed it up for me. Obviously, there has been quite a bit of scandal attached to senior members of the church, cardinals, in terms of sexual abuse, turning a blind eye to it, or financial irregularities. And it is, as one of your speakers was saying, quite a political process. The first ballot today, there may be 30 names will get a vote. It's tomorrow, the wood is cleared and the serious business begins, and you have to gain what would be called in a secular election momentum. That's the most vital thing. And if your vote stalls or you don't do as well as you had hoped, then your supporters, be they traditionalists or more liberals, they will look for a candidate who might attract more votes. And that's what happened famously in the election of Cardinal Ratzinger.
Are you comfortable with your book and this film really serving as a primer for people who come in with perhaps no understanding of this process?
To be honest, Lester, yes, I am. I feel like one of those songwriters who writes a Christmas #1 that is trotted out again and again. I look forward to the next conclave when maybe if I'm still with us, I'll be back again. I mean, I tried to make the book accurate. I know some people didn't agree with it or were offended by it, but most have conceded that the actual procedural detail is correct, and that was also retained in the film, I think.
Robert Harris, we appreciate you joining us here as we watch this play out in real life. George, at this point, are they taking the actual oath?
Yeah, that's the book of the Gospels, and you place your hand on it and you read that rather lengthy oath in Latin. Latin has diminished in the life of the church over the past 60 years, but on occasions like this, it still is the church's official tongue.
Well, I think that's how Benedict announced his resignation, was in Latin.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So now everybody's going to do this one by one. This is Cardinal Fernando Filoni, the second most senior member in rank.
So they will take this
College of Cardinals.
So they take this as a group, and then individual.
One by
individual.
one by one.
Okay.
One by one.
And you're going to just see some of the contenders, or who we believe are contenders, to be the next pope. Luis Tagle from the Philippines is now taking the oath. He's often called the Asian Francis.
We find him as the first American to take the oath. Cardinal Robert Prevost, an Augustinian member of the Augustinian order. He is in charge of the office here in the Vatican that helps the Pope choose bishops. He spent a lot of time in Peru as a missionary and then a local bishop.
And he's the one American who is being talked about as a potential pope. Correct.
Yes. He's one of the Eastern Catholic cardinals. I'm not entirely sure who. Slightly differently dressed. This is a marvelous demonstration, Lester, of the universality of the Church. In 1958, when John the 23rd was elected, it was 90% European electorate and a heavily Italian electorate. Italians are 16 votes out of 133 this year.
Europeans are 39%.
The Europeans are 39, 40%.
But the church is not growing. The church is not growing in Europe, for example.
No, but it is growing fantastically in sub-Saharan Africa, and that will eventually show more and more as these electorates shift over the course of the 21st century.
But do you think that is a point that they've been talking about this week, or is it high on the radar? This idea of are we representing where the church is?
I think they're very aware that there are living parts of the world church and dying parts of the world church. The living parts seem to be those who are most enthusiastic about what you might call Catholicism in full. And the dying parts are those who have conceded a tremendous amount of ground, if you will, to the public culture. And that is particularly true in Europe. The church in Germany, which had an enormous influence intellectually on the Second Vatican Council 60 years ago, now has 2% mass attendance on Sundays in major German cities. It's just a great sadness.
What I think is really interesting, the two top Italian candidates, Pietro Parolin, who was France's Secretary of State, and Pier Battista Pizzaballa, who is the Patriarch of Jerusalem, they are Italian, but they're diplomats, Lester. They have worked all over the world. So they have a global view. They have a broader horizon than someone who just spent their career here in Rome or Italy.
Are these cardinal electors, are they subject to some of the discussion? Because again, they weren't sequestered the last few weeks. They get up presumably and read the paper. And
I've been struck these past 2 weeks, Lester, I have to say, by the fact that I would say 90% of these men live in a completely different communications ecosystem than the three of us do. I mean, we're on the phones, we're on the computers, we're reading all this stuff, we're writing all of this stuff. They're not doing that in the main. They're talking to each other, but they're not people who are looking at their cell phone every moment to see what's going on. They each have very particular local concerns, which is entirely legitimate. And now they're being asked to make a universal judgment. So it's a complex human process in which the assessment of a personality is at least as important as anything that I've written op-ed pieces about since Pope Francis died or anything of the sort.
That's Cardinal Raymond Burke, who is from St. Louis and
Wisconsin native.
Wisconsin, but he served in St. Louis. But he led, if you will, the anti-Francis faction of the church during the last 12 years.
And there are 10 American cardinal electors taking part in this process. We're joined now by our Vatican analyst, Christopher White, who is a Vatican correspondent for National Catholic Reporter. Christopher, we thank you for coming on. I'd like you to get your reflections at this moment, how different or not different this process is in your observations.
It's so interesting, Lester, what we've had, for days now. It's just constant buzz, all sorts of reports coming out, dinners taking place late at night, social media influencing this. And now, as we watch them take this oath, it becomes very somber and a very serious moment where you see them thinking under some pretty impressive surroundings about the weight of the decision that faces them. So the activity of the past few weeks really almost goes out the window as we watch these men take the oath right now.
And Christopher, what are the concerns about the state of the church right now? We had talked earlier about, among other things, the Pope has to be an administrator to run this sprawling organization.
Yeah, it's so complex. There are the external issues facing the church. So the next pope is going to have to speak to the issues in the Holy Land and the war in Ukraine and persecution of Christians around the world, migration, the environment. So many issues that Pope Francis, championed from the very beginning of his papacy. Then, of course, the issues in-house are large. The next pope is going to have to deal with a massive Vatican budget deficit. He's going to have to continue to try to tackle clergy sex abuse. So the issues of governance are, of course, on top of many cardinals' minds. So it's about finding the right balance, finding the profile of the person that could do both, that could sort of look internally and externally at the same time. And that's not an easy job. That's why, it's not an enviable task. There's the line in the Conclave film that no sane man would want the papacy, and I think that's widely shared.
Yeah, I wonder if you have a thought on this notion that because they weren't able to stay together in this lead-up time, because there were simply too many of them and not enough places under one roof, will that affect the process? Will there be a call to take their time a little more here?
I think in general there's an appetite for a fairly short conclave. I think there's an apprehension of showing that the church is divided, and one way that they can project unity is a fairly quick consensus process. But I think they will take their time. They may not all be sleeping under the exact same roof, but they'll be sharing meals together, and they've had the opportunity over the past 10 days or so to get to know each other a bit better. But I think it's one of the things that we heard the cardinals talk about over the past 10 days is that in the coming papacy, they want to have better opportunities to be in the same room together, so that when they come together to make big decisions like a conclave, that they know each other a bit better.
We've learned a lot of nuggets about this process and the cardinal electors, including one that we know they have to write their choice by hand, but that some even go as far as disguising their handwriting.
Yeah, it's true. I don't think that the process is so elaborate that the concern of being able to match a signature with a particular cardinal elector strikes me as a bit, fantastical. But, of course, there are some that want to go to any measure possible to maintain the secrecy of their vote.
And we know this is a secret process that is playing out. Christopher, thank you so much for being with us. And Anne, as we watch the acceptance of the taking of the oath here, we're reminded even in this process, it takes a long time,
yes.
especially when you multiply everything times 133.
Right, and think the largest group of electors were the last two conclaves, 115, that both elected Benedict XVI and Pope Francis. When we talk about what the potential length of this conclave could be, history tells us in modern times it goes from 2 days to 5 days. That's what we've seen in the last 100 years or so. So I think that might be a good guide as to how long we will be here.
The conclave that elected John Paul II, the second conclave of 1978, took 7 or 8 ballots to arrive at a consensus. And that only happened after the two principal Italian candidates deadlocked and created the circumstances in which the cardinals could think outside the box. In those days, the box being Italy. Now, I think nationality means virtually nothing in this. Virtually nothing. Pole, Bavarian, Argentinian of Italian extraction. Nationality is gone as part of the template for the papacy. And if an Italian pope is elected, it would be very foolish, it seems to me, to imagine this as the Italian restoration. It's simply because this is the guy that people could agree upon. A moment ago, I saw my friend Cardinal Thomas Collins, the Emeritus Archbishop of Toronto, who was spending Easter with his sister, his older sister in Guelph, Ontario. Heard at 5:30 in the morning that the Pope had died. He's running out to Pearson Airport in Toronto to catch the plane to come to Rome, and his sister says to him, "Get it right."
That's the admonishment.
Yes.
I want to go on St. Peter's Square. I think Molly Hunter is standing by. Molly, I was out there earlier, and I was surprised how many people are already starting to kind of stake a position or, trying to figure out where the best viewing spot will be if and when we were to see smoke at some point this afternoon.
Yeah, Lester, the crowds are streaming in right now. I'm just turning around to see they actually have 4 major screens, which is, I think you can also hear on my microphone coming back to you, with really loud speakers. So everyone is kind of craning their neck, gathering around these screens, watching this. And I heard George Weigel tell you that it is a near impossibility that there is white smoke tonight. I got to say, talking to people down here, Lester, that is not the feeling. There is a lot of hope as thousands of people start to fill this square. And I was here just about a week ago, of course, for Francis's funeral, Pope Francis's funeral. 250,000 people packed themselves into the square. And I am told, and of course, you, Anne, and George would be the experts here, that the crowds are only going to get bigger, that we're going to see numbers like that with a very different atmosphere, Lester. The thing that strikes me, though, watching this procession, watching the cardinals take their oaths right now, everyone kind of trained on these screens together and talking with each other, is that it's one of the only places in the world, or one of the only scenarios I can think of in 2025, that we don't necessarily, as journalists, I have a higher perch than everyone here, that we don't necessarily have any more information than all of the people we're talking to down on the ground, that we don't have any exit polling, we don't have any kind of special sources now who are telling us what's happening inside the Sistine Chapel. And the result that I feel down here is this incredibly kind of galvanizing, energizing, unifying feeling that everyone is kind of in this together. And it's incredibly exciting to be down here. Lester?
Yeah, it is fun. The excitement certainly is contagious down there as you talk to people. And again, many of them had just simply come here on vacation, pre-planned, had no idea they would have a front row seat to history. I want to talk, maybe this is a good point to talk about how this plays out. We're looking right now, the cardinal electors essentially taking a pledge of secrecy, an oath of secrecy. At some point here in the next short time, this will be sealed off to us. The world will not know what is going on in that chapel. And of course, conversely, the cardinal electors won't know what's going on in the rest of the world. And correct me if I'm wrong, there's one vote today.
Yes.
And then starting tomorrow, it will be 2 votes 2 times a day.
Right. 2 votes in the morning, 2 votes in the afternoon, until they get, this time they have, whoever becomes Pope has to get 89 votes. So that's the goal there. But, I was was thinking when I was listening to Molly, I was here in 2013. I was down on the square when the white smoke came up. And one of the great traditions is the people of Rome run to the square. And it's just wonderful to see. There's a real joy and a feeling of community when a pope is in it.
You know, I've told people the same thing witnessing the conclaves, and it's like a river of people. You see them making their way toward the Vatican. And, you know, I've been to Rome a number of times, but George, the city does not appear consumed by the Vatican on a daily basis, but on that day, at that moment, it is.
It absolutely is. And of course, we're in the middle of a Jubilee year here in Rome. So while this is the height of tourist season in the late spring, that has been amplified by the fact that Pope Francis called a special Jubilee year this year. And that has amplified the crowds as well. But I have to say, my sense of the atmospherics has been very positive during these past 2 weeks. There's not been a lot of pushing and shoving. People seem to be patient. The security arrangements for getting into St. Peter's have been massively complexified over the past 2 decades, but I don't sense a lot of grousing about this. There's a genuine sense of if you'll let me use the phrase, world community here that is hard to find in other venues.
Are these moments like these, do they generate a new level of excitement? We talked about the church, especially in Europe, is seeing some fall off in attendance.
Well, one has to hope that this demonstration of the vitality of the church in many parts of the world would inspire those parts of the church that, as Cardinal Arborelius of Sweden said recently, are tired, to get over that tiredness and perhaps develop a little more evangelical energy.
Just thought that's Cardinal Blaise Cupich of Chicago, who just took the oath of secrecy, and we can see in line number 3, that's Joe Tobin, who is the Cardinal of Newark, a native of Detroit, comes from a Union family. So we're seeing some Americans come to the forefront.
Also seeing some amazing shots. The Swiss Guard there. Just if you've never been in the Sistine Chapel, it is something that is worth seeing if you ever get to this part of the world. An amazing piece of architecture. And again, you're looking at the picture on the left. These are people who have gathered in the square. They are essentially seeing and hearing what you're seeing on the right side of the screen. It's being broadcast there. We know that they will also have a camera trained on the chimney. So the crowds will be, if and when that happens, the crowds will certainly be a part of it and be able to witness. The bells will ring loudly, proclaiming not only to people here but around Rome that there is a new pope. But for now, this process, it goes the course that it goes, and you're watching that right now, the solemn recitation of an oath, a pledge to secrecy, honoring the importance of the independence of this process as the outside world clamors for a view through the window, but one that will be denied as these 133 cardinal electors go about their business. Anne has pointed out very clearly that this is not a caucus, a political caucus, so you might want to compare it in some ways in the structure, but this is not a process in which it's played out in debating or loud discussions. But there were times for those conversations, and I love how you say the evening meal may provide some of that.
I think, and that's where you will see sort of more of the horse trading. Is that fair to say, George? Or momentum shifting is probably a better way to say it, as to who's going up, who's going down. And does there come a point where candidates say, I shift my electors to candidate B? Does that happen?
I'm not sure that candidates control electors as much as precinct captains control voters. However, if a man knows that he's not going to continue to grow in his votes, he can certainly signal to those who have supported him, look, it's time to find something else. It's time to build an agreement here. I appreciate your support, but let's look elsewhere. And that can only happen, though, between the two voting periods. If there's a failed vote in the first ballot in the morning, they go immediately to a second vote. There's no pause, there's no discussion. They go immediately to a second vote. Same thing in the afternoon.
I'm sorry, but let me stop you for a second. Do they see the numbers?
Yes.
So after a certain vote, okay, we know this is what we're looking at.
Yeah. When they do the vote counting, there are three scrutineers, three cardinals that are called scrutineers, and they open the vote. One writes it down on his pad, it passes to the second, he writes it down, passes to the third, he reads it out loud, and he keeps the scorecard as to who gets how many votes.
So the idea of going from vote to vote, you'll have that information between votes.
You do, but there's no discussion. There's no let's go get an espresso and talk about what just happened here. They're contiguous voting.
Again, you are watching the cardinal electors on this first day of the Papal Conclave, choosing the successor to Pope Francis. They are taking an oath of secrecy individually and as a group. It's a process that takes a fair amount of time, but we do expect here that in the coming hours they will be taking their first vote.
Lester, could I just make a point about one thing here? During the general congregations last week, several of the cardinals said, yes, chronologically, we're electing the successor of Pope Francis. Theologically, we're electing the successor of Peter. And that's a different framework in which to think about this. And it's part of the mystery and the marvel of this whole business. I mean, how did a probably illiterate fisherman from east of nowhere, as the world then understood somewhere, end up here at the center of world imperium and get himself the world's greatest tombstone, St. Peter's Basilica? I mean, they're thinking about that. They're thinking about the fact that they're electing the successor to the man that these men, and the Catholic Church believes, was the incarnate Son of God, chose to lead his church. That's different from finding someone who succeeds the guy who was right before him.
Well, as we continue our coverage, I want to bring into the conversation NBC News contributor Kathleen Sprouse-Cummings, who is a professor of American Studies and History at Notre Dame. Professor, thank you so much for coming on with us.
Thank you.
I always find it interesting to kind of go. Yes, please give me your reaction to what you've been watching.
Well, as I'm watching this, I'm thinking watching it in real life is even more exciting than watching the Hollywood version. We're seeing all the men come up. One of them will be the next pope. It's truly a stunning moment, and in a sacred space and a historic space with Michelangelo's Last Judgment above them. It's really a remarkable occasion.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned seeing it in real life as opposed to necessarily on a film. What are your thoughts about the fact that so many people are coming to this moment here and trying to understand it through the eyes of a book and a motion picture?
It's remarkable timing that the movie was just out, and of course, while the movie had its Hollywood moments, it got a lot right. It was meticulously researched, but nothing can compare to the real moment. And conclaves are fairly rare. This one is historic. It's larger than ever. It's more global than ever. The cardinals are, most 80% of them are participating for the first time because they were appointed cardinals by Pope Francis. So if we're excited watching them, we can only imagine what's on their minds. This morning in his homily, Cardinal Ray talked about being in a space where you're so aware of the presence of God.
Can you discuss the meaning of this to Catholics, for people who may not be familiar with Catholicism, what the significance of the Pope is and this moment in choosing a new Pope?
The Pope is the spiritual leader of the world's 1.4 billion Catholics. For the first millennia of church history, the Pope wasn't as important and as dominant a figure as he has been. Certainly the last three popes have been global figures that people all over the world, Catholics and non-Catholics, feel close to. Pope Francis himself had a genius for proximity, for communicating his closeness to people, even people on the peripheries far away. So people feel connected to this by virtue of being Catholic. There's a lot at stake here. The church has many problems. So people are looking for someone who has the heart of a pastor, the skills of a manager, and a global vision. It's a tall order to fill, and luckily they've all invoked the Holy Spirit to help them find that man.
I'm going to ask this question kind of backwards, but what would a surprise look like in this process?
Well, we have to be open to surprises, and this conclave is perhaps more unpredictable than any in recent memory. What would be surprising is there are probably about 15 to 20 names among the 133 cardinal electors that are being talked about, that have been talked about as papabile, have the qualities. But there's nothing to say that the name will be from among them. It could be someone that people haven't been talking about, in which case a lot of journalists and commentators will be scrambling to find as much information as they can. That would be a surprise, but again, we have to be open to surprises.
We discussed here, I don't know if you caught it, but we were discussing really the way that this is, the cardinal electors have handled this, the pressure of the last couple of weeks, the outside world looking in on this process. It's a lot of people, it's a lot of men here. Does that change the process in any meaningful way?
It certainly opens up the possibility for a conclave that's a bit longer than recent ones, which have been just 2 or 3 days. To get 89 men to come to a consensus is quite a bit. Surely the cardinals have spent over 2 weeks in meetings and mourning Pope Francis and thinking and talking about the priorities in this election. Now is the time to pray, and a lot, as has been said, a lot will depend on how this first vote goes. A lot will be revealed. We won't know about it, but the cardinals will know about it, and as Anne said, when they go to have dinner, they will surely be discussing. So a lot depends. This is kind of like a primary that we'll see tonight. It'll be the names that are narrowed down.
Are you excited about this moment?
I am so excited, Lester. This is remarkable. I didn't expect to be as excited. We've been preparing for this for a long time, but it's really historic. And of course, I think back to March of 2013 when Pope Francis stepped out on that balcony, and none of us knew what was in store. So again, this will be another momentous election. I cannot wait to see white smoke and to see who emerges. But more importantly, I can't wait to see how that man is going to guide the church at this moment in history.
I think a lot of people share where you're at on that. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us and being a part of our conversation.
Thank you.
And while we were speaking, I was handed a note that we're about halfway through this process. So just to take no meaning from that, other than the fact that this, as I've been saying, is going to play out on its pace.
Yes, yes.
And nothing that anyone can do about it. I know, when I was down in the square today talking to people, they want to see that chimney, and we may see smoke from the chimney today. But as we've been discussing, very, very, very likely that it is going to be black as they begin this process.
It's a shame that we don't get a few more shots of the Sistine Chapel itself, Lester. There's the chimney. No birds this year, unlike last time. The Sistine Chapel today is in the most beautiful condition it's been in perhaps 350 years. The cleaning of the frescoes during the pontificate of John Paul II, the redoing of the lighting inside, it's truly a stunning visual experience right now. It's like living inside a jewelry box, all of which is illustrated by biblical scenes. So as Anne was indicating a moment ago, this is not just the precinct meeting or the ward meeting. It's a religious exercise, and the entire surrounding reminds you of that. I just saw a moment ago here a man I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of years ago who's the cardinal from East Timor. 3.5 million people, metropolitan Philadelphia size. Virgilio da Costa da Silva. He's a wonderful man. He has an enormous number of young seminarians in his diocese. Bishops come to him from all over the world looking for help. And he's a most impressive figure. So when Pope Francis reached out to the so-called peripheries of the world church, he really found some very, very interesting men. One of the men who has made a very strong impression here over the past 2 weeks is the cardinal from Singapore, a man named William Goh. That would have been unheard of 50, 60 years ago. So it's a quite striking gallery of human beings, competencies, concerns, living situations.
And I think as we look at these faces and learn more about where these cardinals have come from, I'm reminded of what the Dean of College of Cardinals, Giovanni Battista Re, said at Mass this morning in his homily, and he urged these men to pick a pope who could unify the church, but still make room for diversity. And that's what you see here. This is the most diverse group of cardinals in the history of the Catholic Church.
What about ages and youth versus seniors?
The youngest cardinal is actually 45.
45.
Cardinal Bychok. He's a Ukrainian Greek Catholic eparch in Melbourne, Australia. He's just 45 years old. Another very young man is an Italian missionary in Mongolia, where he has 1,500 Catholics under his care. And on the far end, I mean, Cardinal Filoni, I mentioned a moment ago, the second-ranking member of the College of Cardinals, he's 79. So it's 45 to 79. That's the age spread.
But there's a sweet spot, I think people think, in age for the next pope, somewhere around 70, 75, somewhere in there, George?
A pope who begins his pontificate at 60 is probably not going to be an attractive possibility for a lot of people, because you're looking at 25 years. And so I think the sweet spot is late 60s to mid 70s. Now, somebody can emerge who's outside that sweet spot, and then it happens. But that's theoretically where the sweet spot is.
But then there's youth, there's issues of liberal versus conservative. I mean, all these things that go into this process.
There's issues of living parts of the world church, dying parts of the world church. Why are the living parts living? Why are the dying parts dying? There's also a question of management, Lester. I think for all of his many qualities, Pope Francis and Pope Benedict, neither one of them was a particularly strong manager. Pope Francis was in fact a bit of an autocrat, following his Jesuit roots, as that tends to be the model of governance in that religious community. There's been a lot of talk over the past 2 weeks about let's return to a more stable, orderly process of decision-making within the Vatican itself. So that's one question by which a candidate would be assessed. Has this man shown a capacity to work collaboratively with other people?
Did Francis talk, or did he, as he appointed many of these cardinals here, did he think about them in the view that they would be choosing his successor?
Well, you're always thinking that.
Was he playing the long game, I guess?
Well, I think you're always thinking that, but I think he wanted to lift up men he thought were doing important jobs in the world church. I think a lot of it was very personal and idiosyncratic. He goes to Mongolia, he meets this Italian missionary, he thinks this is a good guy, let's make him a cardinal.
And so we see them again one by one, the cardinal electors approaching the front of the chapel as they recite the oath of secrecy, honoring the independence of this process. And the order here is by seniority.
It's seniority within ranks of cardinals. There are 3 groups of cardinals. They're all priests. They were all ordained deacons, but there are ranks of cardinals called cardinal bishops, cardinal priests, and cardinal deacons. Cardinal bishops are usually men running major departments here in Rome. Cardinal priests are usually the bishops or archbishops of dioceses around the world. Cardinal deacons, so-called, are again people here with jobs in the Roman Curia, and then you are ranked within that group by the date of your appointment as a cardinal. So, in fact, the senior cardinal deacon, Cardinal Dominique Memberti from France, is in fact in his early 70s. He's not a young guy. He gets to announce the new pope. If he doesn't come out on that loggia to announce the new pope, we'll have a pretty good idea that he's the new pope.
Gosh, it took me a second.
Yeah.
And then again, this oath is coming from, tell me the book.
Well, they're swearing the oath on what's called the Book of the Gospels. It's a liturgical book in which the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are contained, and it's from that book that the Gospel reading at Mass is taken. The cardinal with the flowing white beard there is the Archbishop of Tehran in Iran. I think he has 6 priests in his diocese. Maybe 20,000, 30,000 Catholics.
Let's listen in for a moment to get a sense of this oath.
Et ego Robertus cardinalis repole, spondeo voveo ac iuro. Sic me Deus adiuvet, et ec sancta Dei Evangelia, que manum mea tango.
Each one, 133 cardinal electors taking this oath. And once this process is over, we will essentially be shut out. They will be shut out from us. We'll be shut out from them.
Correct.
How quickly do they move to voting?
Well, as Anne mentioned a moment ago, Lester, there will be a spiritual reflection given by Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa, the former preacher to the papal household. Then he will be invited out because he's over 80, and then they'll get down to the first bell right away. Now, as you have seen here, imagine each one of these men walking up one by one to put that ballot in the urn on the altar and saying, I hereby swear by Christ the Lord, it will be my judge, but I'm choosing the one I think should be elected. In goes the ballot. So you do that 133 times. And let's say it's a stately process.
It's not going to go fast.
It's not going to go fast, and there are no electronic tabulators. I had mentioned Cardinal Momberti. There he is right there.
But that's, I think, one of the things that makes this so fascinating. It's one of the last mysteries in our world, because we only get to see this. We don't get to see what happens during the conclave. We can only imagine it, and we don't know who that person is going to be. And I think it's fascinating. This time, Pietro Parolin, who is one of the considered front runners, if you will, he's actually going to run the conclave. And does that put him in an awkward position? Or
well, he can't ask himself if he accepts. So Cardinal Filoni, who is the second-ranking cardinal bishop, would ask him, do you accept election? But running the actual balloting is a very formalized process. I mean, it doesn't give you a leg up electorally, or it doesn't diminish your chances either.
We were talking about the length of time. There's a lot of focus on that naturally, that we want to, we enjoy suspense and drama, but I think people also are certainly interested in the outcome. We look at conclaves in recent histories. 2013, 2 days, 5 ballots is what it took. Very quick. Pope Benedict, 2005, it was again 2 days, 4 ballots. John Paul II, 3 days, 15 ballots, if I'm reading that correctly. I'm sorry, so I'm not reading it correctly, but you get the idea here. This is not, certainly in recent history, has not been a long and drawn-out process, which tells us a lot, I guess, about the cardinal electors and the state of the church and what people are thinking about.
There was a sense of stability, I think, in 2005. There was a sense that Cardinal Ratzinger had done a brilliant job as the celebrant of John Paul II's funeral. He had given a wonderful homily on that occasion. He was terrific in running these general congregations of cardinals because he could speak all the relevant languages. So that moved very swiftly. But you saw it took 11 ballots to elect John the 23rd. And that was an interesting election, if you can believe some of the things that are written about it, because it seemed to defy this notion that you have to keep growing slowly. He kind of plateaued, but maintained the plateau, and then rose up towards the end. There were 5 French cardinals at that conclave who were determined to elect him the Pope.
I want to bring in, I'm sorry, please.
I was just going to say, he had been the nuncio to France. They thought he understood their situation. They hung together and really drove the decision, even though they were a small minority.
I want to welcome to the conversation Joe Donnelly, the former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. I'm interested in your thoughts about whether you would prefer to see a longer process or a shorter one in this case.
I think that this is a year where it's fairly open, and so I think it might take some time to get through this. I think if there's a favorite, it would be Cardinal Parolin, but I don't see that anybody is in a rush to get this done quickly, because it's such a momentous time. You look at the world, and there's so much going on in so many places, and the church wants to make sure that they have a leader that can deal with all of this, that has the requisite talent and ability. And so I don't think anybody's going to be in a rush, and it might take a couple of days. But I may be wrong.
Are you excited by this process?
You know, I loved Pope Francis. He was just the most wonderful person to work with, to spend time with. But I am excited that, you know, in his absence, if he's not there, that the church be able to find a leader who can continue that presence on the world stage of his voice being so important, so well heard, and I think that's what they're trying to do right now. You know, I used to think when I was the ambassador, there's the President of the United States and the Holy Father, and those are the two voices that people hear the most in this world, and that's why this is so important.
Does the Catholic Church and the world, if you will, need someone like Francis, or someone who is a stronger administrator and who can deal with some of the problems of the Holy See?
You know, I've looked at this as there's a multitude of things that they're looking for. You know, the old joke, it's like, well, as long as we get Superman, we'll be fine. They need somebody who is charismatic and can make an impression on the world, somebody who can manage the finances of the Vatican and run the shop well. And then the third piece is doctrinally, you know, there's the church is in different places on the progressive side, conservative side, moderate side, somebody who can try to bring those together. But I think Francis was not a bad administrator in that he really helped to clean up the finances. They're far from perfect, but they're a whole lot better than when he walked in. And he's got some amazing people in governance, like Sister Raffaella Petrini, who's now running the Vatican State, who is part of an order of sisters from Connecticut and is as smart as they get.
Oh, it's September.
Okay, it appears, we pause there for a moment. Ambassador, excuse me, we believe they have finished with the oaths now, and if that's the case, okay, we will soon see the doors shut.
Extra omnes.
That's Archbishop Diego Ravelli, the Papal Master of Ceremonies, who just said extra omnes, which is a polite Latin way of saying everybody out.
And we'll see exactly what happens if they cut the camera feed or what the modern version of this is. But that concludes the taking of the oaths, and the process is about to begin. They will be behind closed doors until they come up with a new leader. We should note, you may see some other folks there, the staffers at the Sistine Chapel who are necessary or essential workers, if you will. They too have had to take a oath of secrecy here as this process is about to get underway now to the brass tacks of it. As we've noted, this is not now the point where pounding of fists and arguments and discussion, that has passed. This is about voting. This is their sole purpose right now. They are electors who will now lead through that process and choose the next pope.
And they are very serious about the secrecy, as we have said. Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York tells his story during the last conclave when he walked in with his secretary, and his secretary was carrying a briefcase, and one of the Swiss guards you see there took the sword and put it down and wouldn't let the secretary come in with the briefcase. I mean, they really mean business when it comes to the secrecy.
These are the really a kind of official legal witnesses to this process. That's Monsignor David Yeager, one of the prelate auditors of the Rota, one of the church's highest courts. He and I just happened to have lunch together yesterday. He's a remarkable character. Native Israeli, is a major figure in negotiating the fundamental agreement between the Holy See and Israel that established diplomatic relations between the two.
This is a remarkable shot here. I believe that's the cardinals you're seeing in the background now is the last of the non-cardinal electors leaves the chapel. And it feels very lonely from this angle.
The Archbishop is making his way now.
He is obeying his own instruction to leave.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall.
And you do have to wonder what they're thinking at this moment. With this, they are shut out from the rest of the world, as are we. Where they are.
The next time we see them, the Catholic Church will have a new pope.
And so the cardinal electors are now alone in the Sistine Chapel. The admonition for others to leave made. And now they will begin the process. As we noted, moment of reflection.
Right.
But they will be getting down to the brass tacks of voting here quite soon.
Yes, Cardinal Cantalamessa will offer the reflection, and that will in part set the tone, along with the homily by Battista Re at this morning's Mass, set the tone for this conclave.
Of course, this is being watched all over the world on television, but certainly at St. Peter's Square in front of the Vatican, where we find Molly Hunter. Molly, you've been speaking to folks who are delighted to be witnesses to this historic moment.
Yeah, delighted is an understatement, I think, to be witnesses to this moment. I'm standing with Kelsey and James from Colorado and from Texas. Jason, excuse me, thank you. You just clapped as that happened. Can you just share, you're tearing up right now, can you just share that moment, what that moment was like?
Well, I think right now the eyes of the whole world are on Rome. The church isn't just another institution, it's the witness of 2,000 years of Jesus Christ's story coming to life. To the person who will head, the followers of that story, the 1.4 billion Catholics around this world and the many others that look to him for spiritual leadership, when they closed those doors, when they announced extra omnes and everyone else went out and the cardinals said about their auspicious task of electing the next shepherd of the church, it's just a breathtaking moment to watch.
Kelsey, you squealed with excitement. You were so excited. You flew here directly just for the conclave, just to be here.
I did.
Can you tell me what it's been like just to be out here in the square with everyone else many people who did the same?
Yes, it's been tremendous joy. I work for a Catholic group, Catholic Vote, the largest Catholic political advocacy group, and my boss has just been nominated the ambassador to the Holy See. So this has a special importance because he'll be here in Rome after his nomination goes through the Senate, and to be here alongside all of the Catholic faithful throughout the world, it's a joyous occasion.
Jason, you guys are going to stay out here, wait for the smoke tonight, right?
Oh, for sure.
For sure.
I was in Paris this morning. There were no seats to Rome, so I had to fly to Florence. So I had breakfast in Paris, lunch in Florence. I'll be here.
Anything to get here.
I had to be here, because I'm a great admirer of Cardinal Pizzaballa. I sit there and pray. My heart is with him. He offered his life for the hostages in exchange for the hostages.
You guys are going on the record with a front runner.
Yeah, I am, because I think that we've seen such suffering with the church in the Middle East and Africa. He's Italian, but his heart is with the persecuted church. And as an American Christian, as American Catholics, we're the most privileged, we're the wealthiest, most privileged Catholics that have walked the face of the earth. And so to have a pope that orders our hearts and our attention towards the persecuted church is, I think, something we need.
First conclave, or were you?
It is my first conclave, yes.
Okay. Big decision to come, or no?
No, I was in Paris for work, and I was supposed to go to Jordan, where we have trucks that we're trying to get into Gaza. I will be going directly from here to Jordan and hopefully to Gaza, but no, I was going to have, if I had to drive here, I was driving here.
You would have arrived here. You guys, the applause that happened when Extra Omnis was declared, and the speakers, as you guys know, were extremely loud here down in St. Peter's Square. There was applause, there were tears, and I think we will see this square just fill up in the next couple hours as everyone waits for that smoke.
Yeah, Molly, it's remarkable to see the emotion that even the small moments in this process provoke among people. I mentioned as I was down there earlier today, met many folks like that family who are just excited to be here, witnessing history, and many of them do have their own views as to which direction the cardinal electors will go. But from experience, I can tell you, when we do see white smoke at some point in this process, it will electrify not only this church, but the people of the world, but certainly people around Rome who will flood the streets if history is a guide. There is the chimney pipe that we will be watching closely. That will be our first indication that a vote has taken place. The ballots will be burned, and we will see the smoke rise. I can tell you, my memories are, it starts off as kind of little puffs,
Yes.
is the way I've described it. It's not a full-on black or white smoke, but it quickly kind of declares itself.
Yes.
I realize I'm animating a smoke puff, but yes, I said that.
Lester, I was thinking when Molly was talking to those people in the square, we've talked about how the next pope needs to be a good money manager or unite the church. But the quality of courage, and that's what attracts so many people to Pizzaballa, because he did offer himself in exchange for Israeli children. He offered himself to Hamas as a hostage. And I was thinking that kind of harkens back to St. John Paul II. Courage was his hallmark.
That's right, and these kinds of rooted men who live out from a deep faith, which gives them the courage, as I used to say about John Paul II, not to live so much without fear, but beyond fear, is something that's frankly very much missing in the world today. And I think the world situation is bearing on this conclave in a way that was perhaps not the case in 2013 and 2005. And the search for someone who can call all of us to a nobler, understanding of what we're capable of. We're not just our worst instincts. We can live beyond fear too. Is a quality that is very much to be desired in the next Pope.
And this picture certainly symbolizes the waiting game now that this has resulted to. We are truly on the outside of a deep secret process. But there you see the faithful as we've seen them at the different mile markers of the death of Pope Francis.
We're so used to seeing this shot of the Via della Conciliazione, this great boulevard that leads up to St. Peter's, and we sometimes might think that's been there forever. It's actually only been there for less than 100 years. Before that, the square in St. Peter's was simply surrounded by the neighborhood here, the Borgo, as it's called. So the creation of that boulevard has given us that breathtaking view of really one of the most extraordinary architectural and engineering masterpieces in the world to which we're so accustomed.
And now with the Jubilee year, Lester, you see pilgrims come up there. There's someone in front bearing a cross, and you see the pilgrims, and some of them sing their way up Conciliazione.
I saw that today.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that will continue to go on as the cardinals meet to choose a new pope. But it's a procession of faith, and I find it very moving to watch.
Yeah, I saw a couple of those today. Very moving, very emotional. A lot of emotions in the city right now. I think as people wait for a declaration of a new pope, the election. Cardinals have been secluded now for probably about 10 minutes or so. It will be a long day, but we believe this day will end with black smoke. Indicating that they have not reached consensus candidate yet. That we should take nothing from that other than that's pretty much true to form of the way this process works.
That's to be expected.
Once we get into the next day and there are multiple votes in the morning and the afternoon, well, things could obviously change. As we've noted, the last two conclaves have ended after just a couple of days. But I suppose no two are alike.
They're not alike, and the last two really have been how could I say this, one-off exercises. In 2005, the consensus in favor of Cardinal Ratzinger was so massive at the beginning that it was simply a question of whether he would accept. In 2013, Cardinals were really in a state of shock over the abdication of Pope Benedict. They wanted to do it quickly to demonstrate that the Church was still on keel, on the mark. This is a different situation. This is a very different situation. This is more like 1978, I think. And my hunch is that it's going to be a bit longer than we've been used to in the past two conclaves.
Let me follow up on that with, we're joined again by our Vatican analyst, Christopher White, who is a Vatican correspondent for National Catholic Reporter. Christopher, this has been part of the discussion, is the length of this, what it would signify if they went beyond 2 days or even 3 days. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, on one hand, the appetite is there for a quick conclave to show that the Church is united. One cardinal joked to me a few nights ago that he's keen for a quick conclave just so he can get his iPad back. But, joking aside, I think there's a real sense that they have to take this very seriously. This is the most important election and most important vote that many of them will ever cast in their lives. And it's also a process of continuing to get to know one another, and that will continue after hours, after they return from the Sistine Chapel back to the Vatican residences where they're staying. They're going to have to break bread together. They'll have dinner time conversations, talks after dinner, and they will undergo this process as long as it takes until they reach consensus. 2/3 is a high majority to achieve. It's much more than most democracies around the world require for a leader to be elected, and that's going to take some time, I think.
Yes.
All right, we're looking again at the stovepipe there with a bird, as I think we've seen in previous conclaves.
Lester, it was interesting to me that during the past week, It was the newer and younger cardinals who said in these general congregations, let's not rush to judgment. Let's take our time. Let's know each other and know exactly who we are voting for. Where there was the older veteran guys who said, okay, let's get this done. I've been here for 2 weeks. I just had Holy Week and Easter. I want to go home. And it was these younger men who really were asserting themselves the past 2 weeks, especially these peripheral, so-called peripheral cardinals. They were not sitting back and being quiet, being the new kids on the block. They were saying, no, we're here to get this done right. And if that takes a while, then it takes a while.
And I think that's also indicative of these are not cardinals, the cardinals from the peripheries, if you will, who came up through the Roman system.
Exactly right.
And they have not had that experience. They weren't educated in Rome. They didn't serve in Rome. And so this is a whole new experience for them, Lester. And then you think of the decision before them. It really is momentous, and they want to get it right.
But when we talk about slowing down the process, because so much of it is already laid out, they don't have a lot of leeway.
No, but I think the point that these younger men were making is let's not feel an external pressure to get this done by, say, tomorrow evening, Thursday evening. That's not something that should be on our minds. Let's let a real 2/3 consensus emerge here.
All right, well, this will continue, obviously, to watch this. This concludes this NBC News special report. We will be back with any updates on the results of the conclave, and we have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCnews.com, and a full wrap-up tonight on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in Rome. Thank you for watching, and good day.